All right, let's dive into these articles by Peter Azaz. He's got some really interesting takes on engineering leadership, like how to lead your team when the house is on fire. How awesome is that title? Or unlocking the potential of one-on-one discussions. What about those titles stood out to you?
I was fascinated by how he ties together these different ideas. You know, you'll go from something like home labbing, which seems very technical, to career growth. It shows how interconnected everything is, especially for engineering leaders.
Absolutely. And speaking of interconnected, that House on Fire title really resonates. Sometimes it does feel like everything's on fire in the tech world.
Right. He's not wrong. Peter uses this wartime versus peacetime leadership analogy, and honestly, it feels like we're in wartime more often than not.
He even mentions that 4-day work week experiment, Magyar Telecom, I think. I was so curious about that. Like, 4-day work week, sign me up. But it didn't really pan out how everyone hoped, huh?
Yeah, the goal was ambitious, maintain output with 20% less work time, but they were basically trying to cram a whole week's work into 4 days without really changing how the work got done.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. You can't just shrink the time frame and expect everything to magically work out.
Exactly. It highlights what Peter was saying about really needing to rethink outdated processes. Like maybe this was an opportunity to go all in on asynchronous workflows, really adapt.
So we're talking about ruthlessly cutting what's not working and being open to doing things differently, but how do we actually lead teams through those kinds of big changes?
Peter's a big advocate for over-communication, especially when there's uncertainty. He's all about radical transparency. Even if it feels uncomfortable in the moment, that's how you build trust.
So instead of trying to project this image of always having it all figured out, you're saying be upfront about the challenges, even admit when you don't have the answers.
Exactly. Better to say, I don't know, but I'll find out, than to try and hide it, because that just breeds negativity. People can sense when something's off.
Especially these days. Information travels so fast, trying to keep things under wraps just backfires, creates more anxiety.
Totally. He's more about creating an environment where everyone feels safe to contribute ideas. Like, let's move away from a culture of blame and towards a culture of learning.
Even celebrating failures. He actually talks about celebrating them, not just tolerating them, which I'll admit threw me off a little.
It seems counterintuitive, but it's about shifting the mindset. Failure isn't the enemy, it's an opportunity.
And he even provides a framework for dissecting those failures, right? So it's not just, oh, well, we failed, moving on. There's an actual process.
Yeah, he even talks about documenting those lessons learned, sharing them with the team, making it a whole thing.
Turning those setbacks into like future upgrades. I love it. So we're talking big company-wide shifts here. But what about just the everyday challenge of staying focused, being productive?
Well, Peter's really open about his own struggles with multitasking and getting distracted. That shiny object syndrome, he even calls it out. I think we can all relate to that.
Oh, big time. It's like our brains are wired to chase the novelty. So what's the antidote? How do we actually combat that?
He's a big proponent of single tasking, like really dedicating your focus to one thing at a time.
Which is easier said than done, right? Especially in this world of constant notifications and everything being like right there.
It definitely takes practice. He suggests things like actually blocking out time on your calendar for focused work, silencing those pesky notifications, even having a dedicated workspace can help.
Okay, so concrete tactics. And it's not just about getting more done at work, right? It's about mental energy, avoiding burnout.
Exactly. And that's where self-awareness comes in. He's big on recognizing your limits, knowing when to say no, prioritizing self-care, all of that.
Can't pour from an empty cup, right? It's essential for everyone, but especially for leaders.
Totally.
Yeah.
He encourages setting those boundaries, making time for things that recharge you, even if it means saying no to things that don't align with your priorities.
Leading by example when it comes to self-care. Love it. It sounds like he's painting a picture of a leader who's very in tune with themselves and their team.
He is. And that actually leads perfectly into his thoughts on one-on-one discussions, which is another area where he has a lot to say.
Yes. And it really resonated with me because it's about so much more than just going through the motions of a status update, right? Which, let's be honest, can sometimes feel like checking a box.
Totally. He has this 4-level pyramid for effective one-on-ones, and it's really interesting. It goes way beyond the surface level.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's break it down. I know it all starts with trust, right? Building that foundation.
Yep. He's all about making those one-on-ones a safe space for people to actually open up, where they can share honestly without feeling judged.
So, active listening, empathy, really connecting with your team members.
Exactly. And once that trust is there, then you can move to the next level. Clarity and direction.
So, making sure everyone's clear on their roles, aligned on the team goals, that kind of thing, moving in the same direction.
Exactly. Then, once you have that shared understanding, the third level is all about supporting execution, helping your team overcome roadblocks, brainstorm solutions.
Less about dictating and more about empowering them to do their best work.
Absolutely. And then at the top of the pyramid, and this is where it gets really interesting, it's about personal development.
Yes. This is where he talks about supporting people's ambitions, even if it means them, like eventually leaving the company. That really struck me.
I know. It's such a good point, though. Recognizing that someone's growth isn't limited to their current role or even their current company.
And that's a true leader, right? Someone who prioritizes their team's growth, even if it means letting them go to pursue their passions. But for those of us who aren't in those formal leadership positions yet, what are some things we can be doing now to build those skills?
That's what I love about Peter's advice. He gives you actionable things you can do regardless of your current role. Like, he's a huge proponent of home labbing as a form of leadership training, which I think is so cool.
Home labbing, like setting up your own servers and stuff at home, how does that translate to leading a team?
It's more about the skills you develop. Imagine you're troubleshooting some complex network issue at home. You have to think systematically, stay calm under pressure, all that. Those are the same skills you need to lead a team through, like a production outage.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that. It's like a low pressure way to practice those skills.
Exactly. And you're building that problem-solving muscle, getting comfortable with uncertainty, all crucial for leadership.
Okay, I'm sold on the home lab idea. What else? What are some other things engineers can do to hone those leadership skills?
Contributing to open source projects is another great one. You're collaborating with others, navigating different communication styles, building consensus, all essential for leading a team.
Plus, it looks great on a resume.
Exactly. He also talks about the importance of improving documentation and internal communication.
Which, let's be real, can sometimes feel like an afterthought for us techie types. We'd much rather be writing code than documentation, am I right?
It's true. But he makes a good point that clear communication is essential for good leadership. See documentation as a leadership opportunity. It's about empowering others, spreading knowledge.
Instead of hoarding information, share the wealth. I like it. What else?
Finally, seeking out mentorship and feedback is crucial. Learn from those more experienced and actively ask for feedback on your work.
Because we all have blind spots, right? And sometimes it takes someone else pointing them out for us to see them.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to self-awareness, which is probably one of the trickiest things for leaders to master, especially for those of us prone to overcommitting or getting lost in the weeds.
Oh, tell me about it. Sometimes I have to, force myself to come up for air and look at the bigger picture. It's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day.
It's a constant struggle. But Peter is honest about it, which I appreciate. He talks about his own issues with focus and that shiny object syndrome, but he also gives some really good advice on how to manage all of that.
Like what? Give us the secrets.
Well, he's big on things like single tasking, time boxing, we touched on those, but also setting clear goals and, this is important, celebrating those small wins.
Yes, those little wins keep you going, especially when things get tough.
Absolutely. And speaking of tough, he doesn't shy away from the hard parts of leadership, like making tough decisions, having to communicate things that maybe people don't want to hear.
Yeah, he talks about leaders trying to shield their teams from bad news, like it's somehow protecting them, but it always seems to backfire.
It's like you can't just pretend the fire alarm isn't going off. People see the smoke.
Yeah.
And then the rumors start, and it just makes things worse.
Totally. It's like that trust fall thing. If you don't think the person's going to catch you, you're going to freak out, and the whole thing falls apart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Peter's a firm believer in honesty, even when it's hard. Transparency is key.
So how do you actually communicate those tough decisions? Because it's got to be more than just, sending out a cold email, right?
He suggests starting with a clear, written announcement, lay out the decision, the reasoning, the impact, get everyone on the same page right away.
No surprises, no ambiguity.
Right. But then follow up with a Q&A. Give people a chance to voice their concerns, ask questions.
So you can address those concerns directly, provide more context.
Exactly. And it's an opportunity to show empathy. People might not agree with the decision, but they want to feel heard.
And sometimes just admitting that you don't have all the answers can build more trust than pretending you do.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of another point he makes. Disagree and commit.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. For those who haven't heard that before, can you explain what it means?
Sure. It's about creating a space where everyone feels comfortable sharing their opinions, even if they disagree with the direction. But then, once a decision is made, everyone gets behind it and moves forward together.
So, healthy debate, different perspectives, but ultimately everyone's aligned on the goal.
Exactly. Especially important in times of change or uncertainty when you need everyone rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, otherwise it's just chaos. Everyone's off doing their own thing. So, disagree and commit, simple but powerful.
Totally. But he acknowledges that it can be hard, especially when you feel strongly about something. So he gives some advice on how to navigate that.
Like what? How do you make that work in practice?
Well, he suggests trying to see disagreements as opportunities for learning. It's not about winning or losing, it's about expanding your own understanding.
Instead of I'm right, you're wrong, it's let's learn from each other.
Right. He also talks about focusing on what you can control. It's easy to get stuck on the things you can't change, but that's not helpful.
Dwelling on the what ifs never got anyone anywhere.
Exactly. Focus on the problems you can solve, the actions you can take.
Be proactive, be part of the solution.
Yes. And again, this goes back to his whole philosophy of viewing setbacks as opportunities. Even when things don't go your way, there's something to be learned from it.
So instead of focusing on the negative, it's about saying, okay, what did we learn? How can we use this moving forward?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stay positive, have that growth mindset. Every challenge is a learning opportunity. Even when it feels tough, there's always something to be gained.
It's like every cloud has a silver lining, right?
Right.
Sometimes you really got to squint to see it.
You do. And that's why self-care is so important. Building a support network, too. Peter emphasizes that we're not in this alone. Lean on each other,
Yeah.
get support. Sometimes just having someone to listen makes a world of difference.
Oh, for sure. Just talking it out can really help.
Right. And don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. It's okay to admit you're struggling. Take a break.
Like we said, can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself first. It's not selfish. It actually makes you a better leader.
Exactly. And that's something he comes back to again and again.
Yeah.
Being a leader isn't about having all the answers or pushing yourself to the limit. It's about authenticity, being genuine, and prioritizing your own well-being and your team's.
Being human,
Yeah.
with flaws and everything, it's refreshing to hear, honestly. It's so easy to get caught up in that image of the perfect leader, especially in tech. But Peter reminds us that's not realistic, and it's probably not even what people want.
It's not. They want someone real, someone they can relate to, someone who shows up authentically, especially when things are tough.
You know what else really struck me? His idea of driving change beyond your role. You don't have to wait for a promotion or permission to make a difference.
Right. He tells that story early in his career, where he had this big idea for a micropayment system.
Oh, yeah, and he went off on his own, spent weeks building this whole proposal in secret.
Yeah, and his manager basically shut it down. It wasn't aligned with the company's priorities.
Tough lesson.
It was. He learned that collaboration is key, involving others early on, getting feedback, making sure your ideas fit into the bigger picture.
So, working with people not in isolation, but how do you actually do that effectively, especially if you're not in a position of authority?
He has some great tips. For one, don't try to do everything at once. Pick one thing, a specific problem to solve, and create a plan.
Like a mini project.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And communicate. Share your ideas, get feedback early on, be willing to adjust your approach.
So, an iterative process, not just presenting a finished product out of the blue.
Right. And don't be afraid to be bold. Challenge the way things are done, push for improvements, even if they seem kind of radical.
Sometimes those radical ideas are the ones that shake things up for the better.
Exactly. And even if your idea doesn't pan out exactly how you envisioned, the process itself is valuable. You learn, you grow, you build relationships, you contribute to a culture of continuous improvement.
And those are things that good leaders should be fostering anyway, right? That sense of experimentation and encouraging people to speak up.
Absolutely. And Peter really walks the walk on that. Celebrating failure, viewing things as experiments, being open to being wrong. We talked about all of that.
Mistakes happen. It's about what we do with them, right?
Exactly. And the best leaders, they model that behavior for their teams. They admit when they mess up, they ask for feedback. They're not afraid to change course.
Leading by example. It's a theme.
It is, and they empower their teams to do the same. They recognize that leadership isn't about hoarding power. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels empowered to do their best work.
So, as we wrap up here, what are some key things our listeners can take away from all of this, whether they're in a leadership position or not?
I think the biggest thing is remembering that leadership is an action, not a title. It's about taking initiative, inspiring others, driving positive change.
And we can all do that no matter where we are in our careers.
Exactly. And Peter gives us so many practical ways to actually do that, to develop those leadership muscles. From being more mindful about our focus, to celebrating those small victories, to really mastering those one-on-ones and building trust within our teams.
And remembering that it's a journey, not a destination, right?
Yeah.
It's all about continuous learning and growth.
Absolutely. Approach it with curiosity, be open to experimenting, and stay focused on making a positive impact on your team, in your work, and in the world around you.
Beautifully said. Peter has given us a lot to think about today. To our listeners, we encourage you to check out his writing, see what resonates with you, and start putting it into practice because, like we've been saying, leadership is a journey and it's one we can all take together.